Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream 155 Q&A segment, last thing we're doing this year on the DarkHorse channel.
Before we start drinking,
which we are going to do because it's New Year's Eve.
This is not vodka.
No,
Nope.
No, it is not. Well,
Not vodka or gin.
Right. It's really pretty much just water.
Yeah.
Am I correct that we do not have a Discord question?
Yes, we don't have a Discord question. In the past, when I have not had one or I've missed it somehow, I've said things like, okay, if you send it now, I'll get it, and then I forget, and it's sort of obnoxious. So I'm not going to claim that I will see it, but if someone with access to the question that you guys might have voted on the Discord server sees this in real time and sends me an email in the next 45 minutes or so, then I may check and we'll try to get to it. Maybe you can help me remember to check.
Possible we've just answered all their questions.
That would be too bad. No,
That would be too bad.
No.
Yeah.
Generate more curiosity.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yes, a double dose even.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, sure.
What's the worst could happen?
What's the worst that could happen?
I couldn't even say it.
I haven't heard anybody say that in a while. I think we've...
I couldn't, and you still haven't because I couldn't say it.
You were headed that direction and then...
My tongue was like, nope, not going to, no, don't go there. Because we've seen not even the worst that can happen.
We don't
apparently.
know. We now know that we don't know the worst. We can't even estimate the worst that can happen.
We now know that we don't know. All right. Here we are. Let us begin answering questions at darkhorsemissions.com, where you can continue to ask questions. This question looks like it was asked before we got to this section on the main podcast. So let's ask it, but I think we've already done it.
All right.
I've forgotten how to act with the hard surfaces and an actual mic in front of me. It's so much better though. New data indicate that the shot flips inflammatory IgG3 antibodies to non-inflammatory IgG4 type, which may cause immune system to ignore COVID-19 in the vaxxed. Could lack of selective pressure drive COVID-19 to stop mutating? So the second part of that first comment seems like the wrong conclusion to me, which may cause immune system to ignore COVID-19 in the vaxxed.
Well, I mean, I agree that that's part of the implication of what may happen. If it's telling me, I mean, let's take an example, and it's not a perfect example because it's IgE mediated, but if you take let's say pollen, and you react to pollen, and you are induced to not react, maybe that's mediated through IgG4, then...
The induced to not react is an IgG4 effect.
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. What I'm saying is I don't know. Maybe nobody knows the interaction between the IgE system, which is the one that seems to mediate allergy, and the IgG4 system, which seems to tamp down the inflammatory response. Okay. Now, those two things may be identical, and it may match what I said about immunologists using the antigen in question to induce a standing down of the inflammatory effect. But basic point is, if you have the IgG4 anti-inflammatory effect, basically the anti-immunity signal, then that could cause the immune system to stop reacting to COVID, which likely is a very bad thing, right? It's the inverse of what a vaccine is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. There may be instances in which you are better off not fighting, right? So don't know what the connection is, but there are certain viruses that we carry once we've been infected that hide in tissues, and reacting to them may be a bad thing. And basically, once they've invaded, let's say, neurological tissue and they've hid there, it may be best to leave them alone. That may be less damage. Now, in the case of COVID, the mechanism of action, and as far as we know, it doesn't seem to hide in places like immunological tissue. In all likelihood, tamping down the immune response to the pathogen is inherently bad. If we tamp down with these so-called vaccines the immune response to a particular spike motif, it may be that a different immunity arises that the vaccinated will react as naive, that they will then have infections that will precipitate a new immune response to some other motif, to the nucleocapsid, for example.
Motif is a term of art here, or you're using that?
It's a term of art.
Okay. So motif being some recognizable piece of the virus.
Right. Now, I will point out something I didn't mention in the main discussion of this, which probably we should have discussed, is that there is now a distinction in light of this IgG4 result. There is now apparently a distinction between those of us who haven't been inoculated at all with the mRNA stuff, which presumably also includes people who got the DNA version, the adenovectored version, and those who got the mRNA version exclusively, right? So I don't know how that plays out, but the idea that there will be two populations, one of which has, those of us who weren't vaccinated at all against COVID, presumably have a much broader response. The natural immunity is not only stronger, but broader. It's to multiple motifs. And then we will have a population in which...
Or it has the capacity to be broader, right? I mean, you could expose to what for you is a novel pathogen, whatever motif, it's not a term I'd heard before in this context, whatever motif is first recognized by our immune system will be the motif that your immune system mounts a response to first and most strongly. And so your immune system will not necessarily mount a response to all of the things. It's just, it is more haphazard with regard to, it could be, I don't remember the example you just gave. If it's not the spike protein, it's something else. Nucleocapsid. Okay. And given that most of the vaccines seem to be spike protein specific, that gives the potential for a person with natural immunity to have developed immunity that will remain robust even if the spike protein evolves into something otherwise unrecognizable.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, in a natural infection, there are all kinds of mechanisms to cause a diversity in the immune response. So, for example, you have antigen-presenting cells that will take various different antigens and show them to the immune system so that there's sort of a built-in tendency not to hone in on a single motif. The question here is, if IgG4 is a signal to stand down, then a virus that displays the correct electromagnetic signature to trigger that elevated IgG4 response is sending out it's like a transponder on a friendly vehicle that will keep you from targeting it, right? If the tank is putting out a signature that you can recognize, that's one of ours, don't shoot at it. So if first SARS-CoV-2 is broadcasting a signal that our immune system has taken to be a sign not to shoot, that will give SARS-CoV-2 added leeway in people who have that IgG4 triggering. It could extend to the other motifs. In other words, if the virus is putting out a signal that tells the immune system to stand down, then does that basically cloak the other motifs from a reaction? Don't know. There does seem to be the potential here for two different populations. And I would say
human populations.
Yeah. Those of us who did not get the vaccines, many of us have had COVID, will have natural immunity from that interaction and will not have elevated IgG4.
Yep.
And then there will be those. So in other words, you could see a lot of things happening. The population of people who are now showing elevated levels of IgG4 may allow pathogens to circulate that would otherwise shut themselves down, that would have an R naught below 1, which would mean that they tend towards extinction. Yep. But it may circulate, and that may give the opportunity for something to evolve the ability to get to the unvaccinated or the less vaccinated, or the DNA vaccinated, who are apparently not having elevated IgG4. Yeah. So again, it's a classic welcome to complex systems. You know, we don't know how this plays out, but the fact that it's like two human populations, those with the elevated IgG4, that will have two different responses to not only SARS-CoV-2, but whatever other virus can figure out a motif to trigger that shutdown message.
But the second part of the question, could lack of selective pressure drive COVID-19 to stop mutating, SARS-CoV-2 to stop mutating? There's no lack of selective pressure. There may be a diminishment in some domains, in the motif of the spike protein in those who are most mRNA vaccinated.
Well, it depends. My guess would be the stand-down signal that is mediated through IgG4 could result in increased viral proliferation in those who have that effect, and therefore decreased selective pressure. I could see that.
Oh, because there's just more of it, and so those people. But that hinges on there's an assumption in there, which is that such people would be more infectious. Because just producing more that doesn't have many mutations or any within the individual doesn't have any evolutionary effect unless it then goes out into the world and
right.
transmits.
So you could have a difference in the sickness within an individual that doesn't result in it passing on. But my guess is what you've got is, the more virus that's infecting greater numbers of cells effectively constitutes a larger laboratory in which this gain-of-function experiment exists. So anyway, I think it's frightening no matter what category you're in.
Yeah. Excuse me.
But something else I want to say. I did want to say one other thing about this question of inflammatory and anti-inflammatory responses.
Oh, yeah. Can I actually read? So I had this question for you, and we didn't get to it in the top of the hour. Let me just read from the abstract.
Sure.
Right? This is, again, if you want to show my screen, you can, Zach. This is the paper we talked about in the main episode today, Livestream 155, by Ergang et al. Class switch towards non-inflammatory spike-specific IgG4 antibodies after repeated SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccinations. The title of the paper. Second sentence of the abstract reads, shortly after the initial 2 mRNA vaccine doses, the IgG response mainly consists of the pro-inflammatory subclasses IgG1 and IgG3. Here we report that several months after the second vaccination, SARS-CoV-2 specific antibodies were increasingly composed of non-inflammatory IgG4, which were further boosted by a third mRNA vaccination and or SARS-CoV-2 variant breakthrough infections. So my question reading that was, why is inflammatory, IgG1 and IgG3 being inflammatory, pro-inflammatory, versus IgG4, which is now taking a much larger chunk than it had previously of your total IgG complement after all these mRNA vaccinations, which is non-inflammatory? Why does that matter? What's the relevance?
So it is often confusing. There's certain things like inflammation, which we as patients of medicine consider negative, right? Inflammation is bad. Well, inflammation is bad in a sense, but inflammation is also adaptive, right? So what we're looking at is a system in which inflammation is a mechanism of action for a response to, in this case, a pathogen, right? So for example, you might get, if you have an infected tissue, that tissue might swell, right? And it will swell and produce pus. What is pus? Pus is white blood cells, right? And so when you've got pus in an infected something, what you've got are white blood cells and antibodies that have gummed up the something. Maybe it's a bacterium. And, is it good to have pus? Well, pus is the product of an active immune response. And so anyway, there are various cascades that involve inflammation to actually recruit immune cells into a location where they need to do their action. And so medicine often treats things like inflammation, and the answer is sometimes that's likely to be counterproductive.
Right. Just like, treating all sorts of symptoms that, oh, I'm uncomfortable, doctor. Well, let me see what I can do to make you comfortable. How about we get rid of the reason I'm uncomfortable as opposed to getting rid of the discomfort? Treating fevers is the same thing. Very often, not always, but very often.
Exactly. And so, people will also be familiar. Antihistamines are considered good because they shut down an allergic response. But the point is the allergic response is the inappropriate action of the immune system, and the histamine response is part of a correct immune response to an infection, right? So there's a histamine cascade, and antihistamine works assuming that what you've got is an allergic response that you do want to shut down, an out-of-place allergic response rather than a correctly placed immunological response to a pathogen.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's that. Inflammation is part of a proper response. It certainly goes wrong, but medicine often overinterprets it because it's present where there is pathology, but often as a response to it.
Good. All right, before we get to the next question, could I get you, Zach, to just put something over the light that's coming off the computer, the flashy stroby thing that that is now with our new setup in my line of sight? Because I don't want to have like a seizure on camera. I don't have seizures, but I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
I think not wanting to is perfectly valid.
Totally. I forgot what to do. I forgot to do this. There we go. That's the one we just read, right? Yeah. Okay. Is there an evolutionary take on why humans tend to rediscover the past? Rediscovery of classical antiquity, rediscovery of authentic Baroque musical practices in the past several decades, recycling of fashion trends. And it's written by someone whose screen name is Daniel Kurganoff, violinist.
I'm happy to riff on this. I think it's probably not a single thing.
Yeah.
But the way evolution works, forget humans, forget rediscovery of the past, but the way evolution works is something will generate a new set of opportunities, right? We talked last time about, for example, the amnion, the membrane that allows eggs to be freed from a liquid environment.
It's one of four. But...
One of four, okay. It's a membrane that allows eggs to be freed from a liquid environment. That opens up a whole range of possibilities for creatures to exploit niches that are not right next to water, right? So that causes what we call an adaptive radiation, right? That is a radiation of a bunch of different forms that try different stuff. And over time, what happens is that radiation of branches gets pruned of stuff that worked sort of, but wasn't stable long term, right? And it may be that a bunch of little branches go extinct, and some of the branches that did really well then pick up the niche space that represented the branches that have gone extinct, something like that. But what you see is a large number of experiments that then gets narrowed down over time. So one thing you might imagine in human art space, for example, is that somebody figures out an instrument that allows you to explore some part of musical space that wasn't accessible with whatever you had before, right? And that results in a whole lot of experimentation. Some of it is interesting momentarily, but doesn't go anywhere. And some of it's really good and opens up whole new genres. And so you might imagine that there would be a kind of return to the well phenomenon, right? That basically, you have some set of standards, and then you have experimentation. The experimentation is the fun place to be until it's not anymore. And then returning to the well and figuring out where the next radiation goes is better than trying to create the next radiation from the tip of a branch or something like that. So there's that. I think there's also in human space and this is sort of, it's classic in terms of what we were talking about with respect to conservatism and progressivism earlier today, which is progressivism is where the dynamism comes from, but it's dangerous, right? Progressivism goes wrong a lot, right? You can't say, well, then screw progressivism, because then you don't get anywhere. You have to have the progressivism. But the point is the idea that the progressives go crazy might be kind of an evergreen, right?
Right. The tension between the two and the constant battle from both sides to get more of what they think is right, which is to say change in one hand and not change in the other. That is necessary, because you take one of those away and suddenly you're just stuck, or you're moving fast and without any countervailing force, you're not going to be in good shape after very long.
Right.
Because stuck in a totally static world, if it had been working, might be okay if everyone agreed that it was awesome. And but that's welcome to complex systems times 1,000 here, right?
Yep.
So there is no ability to say, well, what we had was perfect and it remains perfect and nothing has changed, and therefore that's what we need to maintain that across all systems. But of course, there will be domains at which that may be true. Like, actually, and all of the proposed changes are too dangerous, too unknown, too fraught, so we're going to stick with what you got for now until we know more about possible changes, at least.
And there is also the added problem that when things go wrong, you may not know where the wrong turn was. You may be able to detect. I mean, we are in this circumstance, right? Every institution has failed. People are believing absolute gobbledygook. But the question is, all right, if you wanted to reboot from a prior state, what's the last state that worked?
Yeah.
We're not going to agree on that, right? Yep. And so I think we are seeing a strange, but maybe not so strange, resurgence of a conservatism deeper than most of us would have expected to return, right? Mm-hmm. We're seeing a resurgence of religious belief that is more fundamentalist than you might expect in a very modern age like this one. And in some sense, I think the message is, yeah, but you guys screwed up, right? The last thing that worked, was closer to those old stories.
Yep.
So anyway, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I think there's a danger in that too, because I don't actually.
Of course there is.
You can't. Not only is it, it is unlikely to work, right? Returning to the world of Yahweh and Jesus doesn't answer the questions of today. So it's even if it is the last place that things worked, it's not relevant to most of the stuff that we actually now need to manage.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue, said I, as about as far from being a biblical scholar as you can get. I read it, but it's been a while, right? You could argue that you need those as you need some of the teachings therein, at least in the New Testament, in order to be foundational, things about which we can agree, but that is only a start, and that it is nowhere near that. I could see an argument for, and I'm not sure I'm making this argument myself, but I could see an argument for that being necessary but not sufficient to move forward with care in the world in trying to form a society that is maximally able to generate well-being for the maximum number of people as possible.
Yeah. I think we're in trouble because I think the instinct to reboot from something fundamental is kicking in, and I think.
Well, I didn't make an argument for reboot. That wasn't anything that I said.
I know, but you said necessary but not sufficient. And my point would be
I also said that wasn't my argument, that I might believe that, but that I could see that argument being made.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is, as we argue in our book, you can't go back. We have to go forward, and there's no safe way to do that. And I think that's just where we're stuck. It's really
right. But I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with in what I said. That this is a point that I feel like you've made, that there is much in specifically the teachings in the New Testament that hold value in today's world, and it is turning away from them that has in part led to some of the decay of other functional systems.
Right. So I guess what I'm arguing now, and I don't mean to be disagreeing with anything that you're saying. I don't think I do. But you have two things have gone wrong.
Only two.
Two fundamental things have gone wrong. One, we've lost our minds in some kind of a progressive way, right? Where there's no discipline in progressivism anymore. And
change is good. All change is good.
More change. Everything that we have is bad. Tear it down. Something better will happen. All that nonsense. The instinct when that happens is a reboot. But in the period since the last reboot, everything fundamental has changed, right?
When are you calling the last reboot?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it matters. I think the point is the rate of change is so fast that whatever the last place where there was an outbreak of conservatism that restored some kind of mental discipline that allowed us to move forward again, the last time that happened was a whole different world. And so I don't see an answer. I
don't yet hear. You said that we got two problems, and you said progressivism.
Yeah.
So the issue on the conservative side, the side on the right, whatever we should be calling it, the issue is what is that in a nutshell? If the problem over here in terms of like how progressivism is going off the rails is if change is often good, the illogic goes, then all change must be good, and we must embrace all change, or else you're a fascist, right?
Well,
so that that's easy to describe, and we've done it. So what's the version
it's
on
like
the right?
This. Imagine that we set off into space in a fit of wide-eyed progressivism. Okay, we're traveling in space, and then at some point, the space progressivists lose the plot, and they start following dark energy to the next great human location. And it turns out not to be true. It doesn't lead us anywhere, and we're starving and all of that. Okay? And the answer is, well, let's go back to the last place that worked. Good idea, except it blew up. It's not there anymore, so you can't go back to it. And that's what I'm arguing has happened, is that the world in which the conservatives, in which their point applies, doesn't exist.
Okay,
and they don't know that.
The golden rule,
yeah,
is not. It has not blown up.
No, the golden rule. And this has been my argument with Jordan Peterson is there are a few things that are timeless, right? Golden rule being a real good example, and the fact that the golden rule is a one of many versions of that rule in various different traditions tells us that one's probably pretty robust. But the point is you can't live on the golden rule. You can't eat it, right? So the idea that there's some group of Amish who remember the old ways and can show us how to do that again, the old ways don't answer how you live at a population in which more than half of us are the product of the Haber-Bosch process.
Right, but I mean you got to exactly what I was going to say. We top of the hour, last hour, whatever hours ago now, we were talking about organic farming practices.
Yep.
And we can afford to and choose to eat in a way that everyone on the planet can't.
Yep.
Right? So that's not sustainable if we try to apply our values and conclusions for ourselves to everyone, equitably.
Yep.
Right? It won't,
doesn't scale.
It doesn't scale. So, the Haber-Bosch process, which fixes nitrogen without having to use legumes to do it, basically, and so allows for a lot more food to be grown, which was invented in the early 20th century, facilitated a population boom, which I don't know what else would have done it. Right, like the history didn't run that way, but it's really hard to imagine what other thing could have caused the population to boom quite so extravagantly.
Yep.
As the Haber-Bosch process, but that's not an argument against organic farming. That's not an argument against So the fact that it doesn't work for everyone. If you're going to make that argument then you have to make it to a number of the choices that we're making elsewhere as well, of course, to be consistent.
But let's take the Amish as an example. Okay, the Amish are a great test case of preserving the old ways. Right, very consciously preserved the old ways and stepped off the escalator of progressivism. If you say, well, the Amish function, and you try to return to it, then 3-4 billion people are going to starve almost immediately. So that can't be a solution. We have to go somewhere that presupposes the Haber-Bosch process and weans us away from its bad consequences. This is one of the problems, I think, for Elon Musk, actually, right? Because Musk is correctly distrustful of the depopulation instinct that so many progressives express. And his point is actually, no, We can have more people, and we can do it well. And it's not that he doesn't have a point. I mean, he is the electric car guy, right? He's also pruning cobalt from their process. He is farsighted and visionary.
I didn't know that.
But I think Mars looms too large in his thinking. And the point is,
I mean, if that's not cornucopianism, I don't know what is.
I don't want to call it cornucopianism because he's super mechanistic about all this stuff. It's not like he doesn't know what it means to make Mars habitable.
Right, but mechanistic is reductionist, right? Like, he's you can can up all the stuff that you need to sustain actual life at the most basic level, and that doesn't tell you that quality of life will be anything close to anything that any human being is going to be able to deal with.
As you know,
I know.
I think Mars is a laughable solution to this problem,
right.
And not because he's mechanistically wrong about the possibility. I think he might be wrong about timescale, but I'm willing to even defer to him on that.
It's not the most important question.
It's not the most important question. The most important question, oddly, is at what point does Mars become a better answer than stabilizing the Earth? And the answer is pretty much never in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So that said, we're now in a pickle. There are too many people to live this way on this planet. There are ways you could alter how we live here, and you could even do it well that would allow more people. But what you can't do is you can't have a system in which the growth in population is built in, right? You could have a stable high number, you could have a stable low number. What you can't have is the expectation of more and more people all the time, right? That is self-destabilizing. And I have not heard him speak deeply enough about this to know, presumably he gets that. But what I hear is mostly his correct challenge to those who say depopulate. But I don't hear enough to know what the alternative plan is, and I hear too much of Mars, which strikes me as a kind of, it's a Hail Mary pass at surviving what seems to be coming, but it's not nearly as good as averting the disaster down here on Earth while it's still preservable.
Yep. I'm not sure how we got onto Elon Musk.
He's a space progressive of an interesting kind, I think.
Okay, next question. Somehow I think we've answered 2 questions and it's like 40 minutes in. This one is written in slightly concise style, so I'm going to try to interpret it. Gatto, John Taylor Gatto, says, I think this is a representation of Gatto's view on Darwin and Wallace. I will say before I read the question and try to make sense of exactly what it says, that Gatto's take on evolution, at least as he understands it, as it has been taught in schools, is the one place where I have discovered that I completely disagree with him. That I think that Gatto has fallen prey to the thing that so many social scientists, and I don't think Gatto called himself a social scientist, but I've interacted with so many social scientists, anthropologists, sociologists, that sort of thing, who think that Darwin is evil and therefore thinking evolutionarily is evil because of the way that either they learned what it was or the things that have been done in its name. And this is just a simple logical fallacy. But at least insofar, and I haven't read all of Gatto's books, but I've read a fair bit, and I love him overall in terms of educational thinking and theory. But I think he does fall prey. I think he can't anymore. He's dead now. But he just never had anyone who actually understood what evolution was to just sit down and be like, no, this is actually what it is. So it's possible that this question suggests that he did, because what it says is Gatto, Darwin versus Wallace was political. Schools got biological advance via deadly competition rather than adaptation and cooperation are primary. Do you agree? So I don't get the Darwin versus Wallace here, because Darwin and Wallace weren't like competition versus cooperation. Neither of them particularly put one of those before the other. If I understand the question correctly, and I don't remember seeing this in any Gatto that I've read, it sounds like we are being told that Gatto said that the version of evolution that was being taught in schools was competition-driven as opposed to cooperation-driven. I don't agree with the combining cooperation with adaptation there. That doesn't make any sense. Adaptation is equal, cooperation and competition are equally adaptive. So take that out of this picture here for a moment. And I don't understand the Darwin versus Wallace thing either, because...
Yeah, I think it's almost their background as people.
Yeah, okay. So, but take that out too. I don't know if that's a misunderstanding, if that's just the way the question is worded, misunderstanding of Gata, I don't know where that is. But if we take it to how I think what this means is, and maybe this is a match for what I have seen as an error in Gato's thinking on evolution. We are told, argued, evolution was taught as competition for reasons that have nothing to do with reality. And if we just gone down a different path, then we would have been studying cooperation just as much. And I'm reminded of this crazy thing that we experienced in grad school, which you know better than I do, and maybe you should report on.
Yeah, here. This is a recurrent theme amongst good-hearted but wrong-headed biologists.
Yeah, well, and other people. Yeah.
Right. It's contagious because it's a very attractive story.
Yeah.
Right. Capitalists who blah, 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 evolution, blah, 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 over-focused on competition and haven't realized the glory of cooperation, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And so, what we encountered in the worst case was ecologists who I would argue is a group of biologists overwhelmingly motivated to go into biology by the desire to do good, which gets in the way of their ability to understand what's going on. Very often, ecology is fascinating, but your ability to leverage what you learn is often minimal. And if they studied it as a basic science rather than a how are we going to fix stuff science, they'd be better at it. But anyway, we encountered ecologists counting instances in which the evolution textbooks reported on something competitive and compared it to the number of times that cooperation was mentioned, and then because the number was wildly in favor of competition, decided that these books were obviously biased by their capitalist blah, 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 blah.
Well, and it's the same freaking error, frankly, as, oh my God, there are more male software engineers than female software engineers, therefore there is bias against female software engineers.
Yes.
Or you shouldn't expect a 1-to-1 ratio, because in the case of software engineers, maybe men are more predisposed to be interested in software engineering, having nothing to do with whether or not they were handed computers as children, although that helps. And maybe, and actually this is 100% true, competition exists in nature a lot, and so does cooperation, but competition is probably more frequent, but it's definitely easier to find and measure.
Well, I'll go one step farther. What got me in trouble, when I first heard this business about counting in textbooks, I did just what you did. And I raised my hand, and I remember the craned necks and the dirty looks and all of that. But anyway.
But they were ecologists. You could probably run faster than them.
Yeah, absolutely. Not nice. And actually, many of the ecologists are very dedicated in field work. I'm sure they'd be just fine out there. But anyway, what I said to them... We have
ecologists among some of our closest friends. Am I allowed to say that?
I think you are. What I said to them as a sort of visitor across the aisle from evolution into ecology, which has always been kind of a fraught border. But anyway, I was interested in ecology because I was interested in the subject matter. What I said to them was, look, competition is inherent to an ecosystem. There is no way you could construct an ecosystem in which competition would not be dominant. You can construct an ecosystem without cooperation. It won't be very interesting. Cooperation will evolve, but the basic point, look,
it'll be outcompeted by a more cooperative ecosystem. Oh boy.
Right. So here's the punchline to the joke. The punchline is, hey, guess what, ecologists? Why do you think we cooperate? We cooperate to compete. That's why. It is a mode of competition. And the point is, it is a more effective mode of competition when it is possible, but it is not
as many things are. Yeah, more effective when they're possible.
More effective when they're possible. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But it is not an argument against competition. It is an argument for competing more effectively against whoever it is you're competing against.
Yeah.
And
Because
anyway,
no, we can't all just get along. No, it's not. It's not going to be possible for everyone. Equity for everyone, including everything in the universe. Like, no, that's not how it works.
No, you would have to architect a system to frustrate the competition, because the competition is utterly basic.
And that wouldn't be stable. It wouldn't last.
Right. So think about it this way. If you have a habitat and there's more stuff in it than the creatures in it can use, then the number of creatures goes up until that's not true. That's the first argument. And so what that means is, to the extent that you have a circumstance in which there's no competition, it will evolve to a competitive circumstance. But even worse, imagine if you've got a habitat that's got 1,000 times as much resource as the creatures in it need, and it's heading towards carrying capacity where it will have the amount of resource that that number of creatures needs. There is also a competition to fill it up first, right? Mm-hmm. So the competition is there from the first hour, right? Even if it doesn't look like it. And so anyway, yeah, if this is a representation of Gatto's view, he's got it wrong, as do all of the other people who have made this argument, as do the group selectionists who make similar arguments. And anyway,
anyone else?
I think that's a pretty good list for today.
Pretty good.
For 2022, I think that's about enough.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll stop there. Excellent. I rarely ever got sick before, but since recovering from COVID last year, I've had 3 major bouts of fever, each lasting about a week. Anyone else experience a similar trend? I haven't heard this, but I'm interested if other people have.
So the pattern is...
Rarely got sick before, since recovering from COVID, has been sick 3 times for a week each. Seems to be getting more sick more frequently. And this is, of course, predicted by some of what we're talking about, like the IgG4 result. Anecdotally, none of us have experienced that, and I haven't heard it, but that's...
Right. But I would say one of the weird signatures of this particular virus is the number of different things it seems to disrupt. It doesn't disrupt them in everybody.
And it will depend on where you where you were sick with it, even though it will manifest, anosmia, right. Loss of smell and taste seems to be pretty common, right? I experienced it. But the first tissue or tissues that it lodged may well predict,
what kind of progressive disease.
What kind of progressive disease and what kind of susceptibility to other disease you have downstream.
Right. I mean, and there's a deeper message here, which is we tend to think the model that we are all running on about getting sick, getting a cold, getting better, getting the flu, getting better, is way oversimplified. The fact is, disease does damage, and damage has consequences. Damage basically accelerates the aging of whatever tissues were damaged, and so you are a composite of tissues that are at different meaningful age based on where you've been damaged and by what. And I would say COVID does damage to a lot of stuff. It's different what it damages in different people and based on how you got it. But the answer is you're probably not as better as you think, right? You were probably made vulnerable. I mean, just think, for example, about a tissue that has lost cells to your own immune system, killing them because they were infected with COVID. Those wounds are now vulnerabilities for an unrelated pathogen to exploit.
Well, I wonder actually if this might not be one of the things that is meant by long COVID, right? Long COVID is clearly kind of a junk category, right? There's a lot of people, some people are hypochondriacs, some people are really sick with COVID-y symptoms for a long time, and there's everything in between. And to the degree that COVID gets into a tissue that actually, will not recover completely, will leave you more susceptible. Even if the person writing this question does not feel sick in between the bouts, that might, if there is greater susceptibility there because of what COVID did, that is at the very least a downstream effect of COVID. And, what is downstream effect of COVID if not long COVID?
Yep. I will say that there are good doctors who are treating both long COVID and vaccine injuries. Mm-hmm. And if you have one of these things, seek them out. They are not hard to find. Follow the podcasts to the doctors who have been proven right by their courageous stand and reach out to them. They've figured out how to treat these things. And anyway, I know a number of examples of people who have greatly benefited after waiting a long time, finally seek out treatment, and are glad they did.
Yep. Okay, let's, we're closing in on an hour, actually, I think, but we've only answered a few questions, so let's try to get, some of these are just comments, really. Okay. We will try to get through them quickly. Dr. Drew is interviewing COVID dissenters, also says he's known Fauci for decades, but may have been name-dropping, seems able to think evolutionarily, maybe worth an interview.
All right.
What is your stance on pet, dog and cat vaccinations, especially if you're living in the country with limited exposure to other domestic animals? One thing I'll say for sure is, and this is, I've talked about this before, that it was actually, we were well into COVID, and I took our black cat Tesla was having some issues, and I took him to a holistic vet. And one of the things the holistic vet said, which should have been obvious to me from years ago, and it hadn't occurred to me or to us, was this was at that point a 9-year-old cat. He's 11 and a half now. And he said, he's as vaccinated as he needs to get. We had gotten him fully vaxxed, and he was getting his yearly boosters of everything. And this vet said to me, why? So, I don't know, because I'm being told to. And he said, what in your life do you have to get that level of boosters of? And of course, this was, I think, the summer of 2020. It was before the COVID vaccines are out. And I, like many people who were otherwise enthusiastic about vaccines, were not so enthusiastic about the flu vaccine because it just didn't seem very, well, I don't know, at least effective, and I don't know about safe. So it's like putting that aside, which is clearly acting somewhat differently. He said, you don't need a tetanus vaccine every year. The stuff that you've been vaccinated against, you don't need every year. So why should your cat? And so that at least, right? That the schedule, I don't know who writes the schedule for veterinary vaccines, but the schedule seems to be built for profit rather than for animal health and safety, and that may actually contribute to why so many, especially older animals, are experiencing so much inability to tolerate food that they could once tolerate.
Yeah, I would say, how could it be otherwise?
Yeah. Right.
You have a system in which there's effectively no liability because you're talking about a pet. And so the amount that, if you kill a person, you're talking about potentially millions in losses. If you kill a pet, you're talking about trivial amounts, so small that nobody will sue. Right now, okay, class action, I know it could happen. But nonetheless, in a system where the risk to companies for producing an unsafe vaccine are minimal, and in a situation where it's hard to track effects, it seems to me inevitable that unnecessary vaccines will be produced. They will end up being pushed by people with perverse incentives. That unfortunately includes veterinarians who make money on these things. For one thing, if your animal's due for a vaccine, then you have to bring your animal in. You're going to get your animal seen. So,
the visit,
Yeah, there's all kinds of perverse incentives.
You probably need to have their teeth cleaned while they're in there.
Yeah.
Pay for another visit. Get them
Totally.
knocked out and teeth cleaned.
So, I have lots of concerns, and I've certainly seen animals become allergic to their food in a way that I don't remember ever having encountered years ago. So what the hell is going on? So I would be cautious, and I would say as I would with a human, I would treat different vaccines differently based on how they are made, how long-standing their use is, and the seriousness of the disease if they contract it.
Yep. And with regard to limited exposure to other domestic animals, I would just say, obviously that is relevant and it should be relevant, but pay attention to which diseases are also transmissible by wild animals.
Yeah.
So something like rabies is obviously not limited to domestic animals. FIV, I think, is limited to cats.
Yep.
Right? And so if you've got an indoor-outdoor cat and there really aren't any other cats in the area, that is a consideration that you should be including in your analysis.
Yep.
Maybe a raised platform for the furry friends to lounge on camera behind you? Question mark? Yeah. I like it. Love the new studio setup. Happy New Year to you both, and Happy New Year to all of you.
Thank you.
What talk have you heard about vaccine shedding routes besides through sex and breast milk? And this is sort of what I was trying to get at before.
Yeah, I mean, look, any route is plausible. You know, could you breathe out some component of this? Sure. Are you peeing it out? Probably. It's got to come out somewhere. Maybe it will be so broken down that it doesn't matter. But anyway, I would just say we are in a sufficiently novel environment with these things that one should not take anything for granted.
Yeah. Heather, where did you get your wooden laptop stand? Is in the one that you use when on your couch? I want one. Can't find that model online. Put on my screen for a minute. I found it. I've had it for years, but they still make it. And here it is, Levenger, levenger.com. And it's actually on sale right now. So yeah, Levenger is tools for readers. They have lots of lovely and mostly a little bit too expensive stuff, but this one's on sale right now. So there you go. There's your answer. It's called the Nantucket Bamboo Lap Reader. Although if you go to Levenger and you just look up laptop stand, you'll get there.
There's no bamboo in Nantucket.
The whole thing is, a recommendation, Danger Model from Polly Matzinger provides an upgrade of self, non-self. I don't know it.
Okay. It's a textbook, I think.
Danger Model. That doesn't really sound like a textbook so much, but it sounds like a book.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, two-part question, it looks like. Bruce de Mesquita's model. A ruler's interest is to minimize the number of keys to power. Citizens are blocks, rewarded if necessary for keeping power, elderly, women, blacks, etc. The woke are amalgamating blocks. People of color, women and minorities. My take is that's why black trans lives must matter over everyone's own interests.
I think there's something game theoretically right here.
Yeah.
It ultimately becomes unstable, right? These coalitions that are going to gather for the purpose of mutiny will ultimately tear each other to pieces.
They've already indicated an affinity for mutiny.
Yes, right.
For instance.
People who have taken on mutiny as a profession are going to end up mutinying against each other.
Indeed. It's really not that hard to predict.
Yes. No, there's no there. And destroying civilization in order to discover that there's no there would be a shame.
I say we stop now.
All right.
Let's do it. Okay. IgG follow-up. I thought the study showed a tamped down response to spike itself. How does that translate to reduced generalized immunity?
It doesn't, except that my understanding at least is that if the variable region of this antibody, this IgG4 antibody, finds its target, that it tamps down immunity. And so that means that anything that can display that flag has the ability to send that trigger message. So the question is, are other respiratory viruses, for example, going to end up evolutionarily exploring space around that trigger? Because the closer they get to it, the greater their effectiveness. So anyway, it's not general immunity that it will be tamped down, but the question is, it may be much broader than SARS-CoV-2 because we're not talking about a motif so complex that other viruses won't evolve it.
All right.
That's your pen.
Yeah, don't take that, man. It's my pen. You going to make any New Year's resolutions? I have one to recommend to you. Stop stealing my pens.
Done.
Actually, you've been better about this lately, in part because I've hidden them.
I have a perfect...
Here, I'll put it within reach and see what happens.
Fiddling is not stealing, though. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, but I mean, you were fiddling, and you recognized in yourself that you were
That was deeply morally ingrained revulsion at the idea of stealing your pen.
Also, you're really tired of having me be on your case about where are all of my pens? Why are they all gone again?
Yeah, that too, except
I really like these pens.
They're good pens.
They're good pens. It's the Signo Uniball .38. Yeah, there it is.
Yes.
Just asking to be taken.
But it's such a beautifully refined pen that I disgust myself when I write with it.
What?
Because
disgust, like the past tense of discuss?
No. I am disgusted by my writing because, you take a fine input. I can't make a decent looking sentence with one of those.
So you definitely shouldn't steal them then. You should only steal the pens that give you an excuse for not having good writing.
You're going to have to eliminate all of the other potential thieves before you know for sure that I'm still stealing them.
We don't have ferrets.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Tesla. Okay, it might be Tesla. Yeah, he is a bit of a writer, a cryptic writer. The new studio lighting is the bomb. If I didn't know better, I'd say Heather is using more makeup than just a little powder. Yeah, I'm not. Just doing the same. Yeah. So apparently, Zachary, thank you. Yeah. It's apparently the side, and I have caught Zachary touching the soft boxes. He likes them very much.
They are such nice lights.
Yeah. No, we're pleased. We got a lot more to do here, but this is good. This is good. Is the blind, unscientific COVID following due to the Milgram experiment effect?
Yeah. I mean, maybe more than that.
That's part of it.
Edward Bernays on top of the Milgram effect, but but at the very least, they got all of the authorities to line up in their lab coats and tell us to shock the fuck out of the patient, and a lot of people did.
Yeah, like, okay.
Yeah,
I'll do it.
Pretty much that.
Oh, it's for their own good? Okay. One more question, which they want answered badly enough that they wrote in twice with the same question. How long have you two been married, and how do you both keep things fresh since you live and work together? Love your podcast. Who says we keep things fresh? Sorry. Now I'm fiddling with my own pen.
Yes, and attacking your husband.
No. I didn't mean that.
No.
You know that. You wouldn't have asked the question that way if you thought that you were going to get crazy back. We actually, as of tomorrow is the year in which we will have been married 25 years. Not tomorrow. It's not our anniversary. That's not until August. But right? Yes.
That's
right. We were married in 1998. But we were together longer than that. At the point that we got married, it felt like, we've been together so long. What does it even matter? Yeah. Traveling helps.
Yes. Also, I mean,
not being terrible to one another.
Having a sense of humor about yourself. The fact of having, it's nonstop adventure, even when we don't choose it. Right?
So we definitely have not chosen.
Nothing like being chased out of your career together to help you see each other in a positive light.
Yeah, but actually remember though, so I know you do, when Evergreen blew up, there was some hope. Some of it was explicitly stated that I would use this opportunity to turn on you.
Yep.
By people at Evergreen.
Yep.
Yeah. And some of them thought I would.
Right. Well, this is a mistake they made across the board. They thought our students would turn on us. They thought you'd turn on me.
Yep.
And I think, it's really a very sad commentary on what their lives must be like.
Yeah.
Right? Are their friendships and their love relationships and their professor-student relationships so thin that they're going to turn on a dime on each other? Probably, but I guess they turned on us, so that tells us. But
it does, and I think I tried following that particular logic theory. It's not a great thing to focus on for this question because it's a lovely question. It's big and expansive, and there's a lot of places we could go here. But I tried figuring out if the people who actually thought that it was actually, even if I were that sort of, even if I'd been looking for an excuse to break up our relationship and our family, and this was it, I'm then still at Evergreen? being a professor, having seen what they're willing to do to one of the other two most popular professors at Evergreen?
Well, look, no way. But I do think that they were tapping into a rule of thumb truth about the world. Most people are dissatisfied with their lives at one level or another, and that makes them buyable. Right?
Purchasable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the point is exploring whether there's some deal you'd be willing to take to turn on your husband. It's insane in this context.
You get to keep most of the life that you created with him.
Right. In fact, the thing is, if you had responded positively to that invitation, you could have been a hero. Right?
A hero among troglodytes.
Right, a hero, an evergreen hero.
Yes.
Right, and so the point is, as with our students, right? What did we see? We saw our students stand up in shock and horror at what was being done because it didn't make any sense to them, but to those
they were awesome.
Right.
Because you had an actual relationship with them,
Yep.
as we have an actual relationship with one another,
But you can imagine. I mean, I don't want to toot our own horns, as it were, but at some level you can imagine how many professors can you go after in that way and not have anybody take the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't have a disgruntled student in your class who's looking for an excuse to say, yes, racist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we didn't.
Nope.
Right? So...
and as much as the deafening silence from almost all of our colleagues was in fact deafening and destructive and eye-opening, no one stood up and said, yeah, but... I mean, and there was one hateful person who keeps trying over and over again, and she's just so perilously incompetent that no one takes her seriously. And not a supposed colleague, not a student.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, most people, there's a lot of opportunity to corrupt people because what they have isn't so good that they wouldn't accept a better offer. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're pointing to is it's just weird and paradoxical in light of the fact that what we were doing was real and our lives were real, and so it fell on deaf ears. But I can imagine that ploy working in other contexts with different people.
Yeah, I think so. And well, there's a lot more to go with here, but I think feel free to ask the question again if you like, and we'll riff again. Maybe that's good for now. A good way to end 2022 for DarkHorse, I think.
Hell yeah!
Don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are now 8 hours from the new year here at DarkHorse, and the vast majority of you have got to be closer. If not, it's already tomorrow. It's already 2023. It's already 2023. Okay, well, how's it going?
Yeah, how is
Is it awesome? I hope so.
Is it safe and effective?
Until we see you next, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Happy New Year.